Hi everyone, my name is Jade Calver. Today I'll be talking all about the postgraduate work permit and tips and tricks for applying for this work permit that's issued to students after they study. So the postgraduate work permit is a work permit that's issued to students who have studied for 8 months or more in Canada. It's an open work permit that allows you to gain professional work experience in Canada. It's often used as an important stepping stone and tool for these students to gain permanent residency work experience that's needed for their permanent residency applications. So understanding the length of a postgraduate work permit is important. So a postgraduate work permit will be issued for the length of your studies if you've studied for less than 2 years, or if you've studied for 2 years or more in a college or university, you'll get a 3-year postgraduate work permit. If you studied at the master's level, they'll often give you a 3-year postgraduate work permit as well. In order to be eligible for this postgraduate work permit, you must have continuously pursued studies in Canada. So that means that you are a full-time active student with no breaks during your course of study. In some exceptional circumstances, the officer will consider you for a postgraduate work permit if there are extenuating circumstances as to why you took a break during your studies. But for the most part, you have to have studied full-time during the course of your schooling. You can have studied part-time during your last semester. Some students will take in a heavier workload during their studies and then go part-time in their last semester. You're still eligible for the postgraduate work permit if you do that, but for the most part, you have to have been a full-time student. In addition to that, you have to, within 180 days of either receiving the notice that you're eligible to graduate or have graduated, you have to apply for a postgraduate work permit. I'll also note that during COVID that normally you have to have studied full-time in Canada. Immigration Canada has recently confirmed that if during certain dates you were studying outside of Canada because you couldn't get a study permit in time due to COVID delays, you will also be eligible for this postgraduate work permit. In terms of when to apply, so again, it has to be 180 days after you receive notice that you're eligible to graduate or that you graduated. In an application, you need to include a final notice of graduation or your final degree, as well as your final official transcripts. Sometimes students won't have final official transcripts in time, so we'll use just your online version of your transcripts and send in those finalized ones eventually once we have them. What's really important to know is that if you're applying for this postgraduate work permit in Canada, you have to have valid status in order to apply for this work permit. Sometimes we'll have students apply at the border, but for the most part, they'll apply online. As long as you apply online in Canada while you still have status as a student or as a visitor, you can keep working and, you can start working full-time. There's a public policy that allows you to start working full-time. You need to have a social insurance number already, but you can start working on your postgraduate work permit, which lets you start gaining work experience a little bit sooner than you would have previously. In addition to this, I also noted about valid status. So if you don't have notice of graduation and your study permit is about to expire, you need to either extend that study permit even though you're not enrolled as a student anymore, but you can extend your study permit just to keep you in status, or change your status to that as a visitor, but then you would have to change your status back to that of a worker, which can be complicated. So I usually try to have my clients apply for the postgraduate work permit before their student status expires, or we extend that student status and apply for the work permit. So if you're extending your student status and applying for the work permit, you need to apply for open work permit fees, as well as your study permit fees. So you do have to be careful how you do this. Postgraduate work permits, again, the officer does have the discretion to issue them for as little as 8 months, especially if you've just done a 1-year certificate course, which of course is not enough time to get that 1 year of work experience that you often need for permanent residency. So keep that in mind when you're studying. Sometimes you want to do a couple of years of school in order to get that 3-year postgraduate work permit. Another important note is that if you plan to work in the medical field or with children, you'll need to have a valid medical exam when you apply for your postgraduate work permit. I often see that students graduate and they don't have a valid medical exam, and then they get a work permit that doesn't allow them to work in those industries. So you do have to be mindful of that when applying for your postgraduate work permit. In the application for the postgraduate work permit itself, you'll need a passport, medical exam if needed, which we just talked about, proof of your current status. So again, we talked about that. You need a proof of your study permit or other status if you have it. You need to include your diploma and transcripts or notice that you're eligible to graduate. Ideally, you would have both notice that you're eligible to graduate and final official transcripts. And then proof of payment, so you need to include your open work permit fees and work permit fees. It's important to include both or else your application will be refused for insufficient fees. Lastly, a passport photo, and then of course the application form in which you would indicate, so it's an open work permit application, so it's the application to change your conditions as a worker in Canada because you're applying for a work permit from within Canada. And in that application form, you would indicate that you're applying for a postgraduate work permit. In the application, be sure to include all of your previous work experience and studies because this is what goes on record for future permanent residency applications. And again, if you want to use any of that information for future permanent residency applications, you want to be ensured to declare everything. So that's everything today as far as the postgraduate work permit is concerned. If you have any questions about qualifying for the postgraduate work permit, if you've had any breaks in study, or maybe you've done some study overseas outside of Canada as a result of COVID travel-related restrictions and are confused as to whether or not you qualify for the postgraduate work permit or not, please get in touch with us. We're online at calverimmigrationservices.com.